Greetings and welcome, friendly students, to Lesson 20 in Seow's A Grammar for Biblical Hebrew, Lesson 20, page 225. This is a very important lesson. It's also a very complicated one. In some ways, this may come off as one of the most complicated lessons in the grammar. Here, Seow won't be introducing a new form or a new a new conjugation or a new paradigm or anything like that. Rather, we're going to get kind of like a strange twist here, a strange plot twist in our Hebrew learning, which will further complicate the ideas we've come to know and love about tense, that is the past tense and future tense, when we talk about the perfect and the imperfect. In Lesson 20 then, Seow begins by talking about this thing which he calls the preterit, preterit referring to past tense, narration. And this is one of those lessons where I could skip right to the chase here and just sort of define this in my own way, but I think it's helpful to follow Seow's words here in the description. There'll be a kind of payoff point here, and it's actually relatively simple, but I want to sort of walk you through what Seow has to say about this thing called the preterit, leading into this thing that we are going to call the vav consecutive. The vav consecutive. The nice thing about this construction, the vav consecutive, is it's pretty simple, and it appears everywhere in the Bible, all over the place, almost every paragraph of prose. But understanding why it works like it does, which maybe is not vital to understanding how it works, could help you understand how it works. Page 225, the preterit. We've learned so far, Seow says, that a situation viewed by an outsider as a complete whole is generally expressed by verbs in the afformative inflection, the katal, or the perfect, right? On the other hand, so katal, that word katal there, that's just like a way of saying the perfect, like katav, or malach, or shamar, right? So the katal form is just another way of talking about the perfect form. He wrote, etc. On the other hand, Seow writes, a situation that is viewed as if it is from the inside, ongoing, is expressed by the preformative inflection, what we might call the yiktol, okay, the yiktol. So that'd be like yiktov, he will write, or yishmor, he will keep. We have seen, therefore, that situations that are perceived to be completed tend to be described by verbs in the perfect. This is only partially correct, however. In fact, the yiktol, imperfect form, has two different origins historically. One of these, which he calls yaktulu, with a little asterisk. That asterisk means that it's a hypothetical form. We don't really have this in Hebrew. Yaktulu for the imperfect, and there was this other thing called, which we might call the yaktul, for the preterit, which referred to the past. Okay. So in a form of the language pre-Hebrew, there was this thing, the yaktulu, if you wanted to say, he will kill. Katal means kill or slaughter. And then there was this thing, yaktul, which means he killed. What happened to the perfect way back in the misty mists of time? Well, forget about that. Let's just say that there was a way to do the imperfect, yaktulu, and then there was this past tense narration called the yaktul. And then the perfect was actually a separate form, katal. So you had different ways. But, and here's the kicker, early in the evolution of the Hebrew language, final short vowels disappeared. And so what was originally this older imperfect form, yaktulu, went to yaktul. Do you see how that works? If you lose the u at the end of yaktulu, you get yaktul. Oh wait, but what happens if you got something called yaktul now? That means then the old imperfect, yaktulu, just became identical to the yaktul, the preterit, okay? And then in time, that form, yaktulu, went to yaktul, then went to yiktol, which is what we now know as the imperfect, yiktol, like yiktov and yishmor. But that used to be like yishmuru, and went to yashmur, but then went to yishmor. Thus, and here's the payoff point, the yiktol form may be imperfect or preterit, actually, historically. In this latter function, if it was preterit, there is, of course, overlap with the perfect. And that preterite use, that old preterite, that old past tense, sometimes comes out in some of the older texts. Like, take, for example, what is supposedly an archaic poetic text, Exodus 15:14, page 225, 1a. Shama'u amim yirgazun. The peoples heard, and they trembled, roagaz. Well, what do you mean trembled? Shouldn't it be the peoples heard and they will tremble because it's imperfect? Well, no, that was the yaktul or the yaktulu, the preterite, right? And it's associated with a katal form, shama'u, just the good old third masculine plural perfect. In other places, you can get helper words like az, this is letter B, then at that time, which cue you into that old preterite or past tense function of what we call the imperfect. Az tifsha livna. Then, or at that time, livna revolted. Pasha means revolt. Third, feminine singular. Livna being a place, and places are feminine. Now, we're going to have this form, which is going to be called the vayiktol, or we might call it the vav consecutive. When you put the word and, va, on the front of an imperfect, you can do it in two ways. One way is just ve, vav plus shava, which is no big deal. Another way is kind of a special meaning, though, and it is a big deal, when you do va. And this form is what we call the vayiktol. Look at Exodus 3:1. Vayinhag et hatzon. Vayinhag et hatzon. And he drove, nahag means like drive a flock, and he drove the flock. You're like, okay, well, it's the imperfect. Why isn't it, and he will drive the flock, or and he may or should drive the flock, or he would drive the flock? Because when you put that va on the front of what we think of as the imperfect, we get a totally different form. It's called the vayiktol, or the vav consecutive, and it, quote, flips the tense of what we would think of as the imperfect from future to past tense narration. Flipping the page, 226. Even though Hebrew verbs do not by themselves indicate tense, as we know, they may be found in certain constructions to refer to a specific situation in the past or the future. 2a. In the narration of past situations, the sequence katal plus vayiktol is used. Since the vayiktol form follows the perfect in this sequence and refers to a past situation, it's sometimes said to be converted, like the perfect, the idea of the perfect tense, katav, he wrote, converts the imperfect into past tense. Hence the vayiktol form is called the vav conversive, or the vav consecutive. Even though that converted idea actually is incorrect, really the form was originally yaktul, so it really is a past tense. It really is the preterite, and it's really not been converted. So take this example, Numbers 32:42, right in the middle of the page. Venovach halach, Nova went along. Vayilkod at Kenat, Novach went along, and he captured Kenath. The word vayilkod there is said to be the vayiktol, or the vav consecutive. It's past tense narration. How do you know it's past tense narration? Well, because it is. It's that it has that vai intro letter. And not just ve, it's not ve yilkod, okay, it's vai yilkod, okay? It's a vav plus a patak plus doubling of the yod. That's the vayiktol form. Okay. So you could have a sequence where you have a perfect and then this vayiktol form, and it all means past tense. However, that vayiktol form just kind of took on a life of its own, apparently, and as Seow explains in the middle of the page, it's not necessarily tied to such a sequence. Even when it doesn't follow a katal form, the vayiktol must be referring to a past situation. Vayikra el Moshe, Leviticus 1:1. And he called to Moses. Yahweh called Moses. Past tense. Page 226, 2b is important because Seow explains how this works grammatically. So this is how you have the vav plus patak, or plus doubling of the next consonant, vayikra, and he called. However, as it turns out, if the next consonant has a shava in it, then it's va without the doubling. That's that Skinnem Levi thing, which, if you're in the class with me, you know that I've talked about before. When a letter like an S-type letter, Samek or Sin, or a Y letter like Yod, or a Vav, or a Lamed, when it's supposed to be doubled but there's a shava under it, it often doesn't take that doubling. So the very common phrase, Vayadaver, and he spoke, won't have that doubling in the Yod because of this weird thing. Also, if the preformative of the verb is Aleph, it's just Va without doubling, because you can't double the Aleph. Va'ochel. And remember, Aleph is the preformative consonant for the first common singular verb. Okay. So don't confuse the Vayiktol form with just the simple ve and plus the imperfect. They're different. So he gives two examples at the bottom of page 226. Vayishma, and he heard. Ve yishma, and he will hear. Okay, so this is very subtle. They don't look any different if you just read the consonants, but it's the vowels and the pronunciation that you have to pay attention to. Okay. So, this has implications, page 227, number 3a. Since the katal and vayiktol sequence is used in the narration of past situations, the yiktol form, imperfect, plus vekatal may be perceived to be its logical opposite. In other words, you'd start with a kind of future tense and then flip to past tense. Thus, in contrast to vayiktol form, the vekatal form in a yiktol plus vekatal sequence is understood to refer to an imperfective situation. That's all a bunch of garbled stuff, probably, to your mind. So let's look at the example, 1 Kings 22:22. Etse, I will go forth, from Yatsa, first common singular, imperfect. I will go forth, v'hayithi, and I will be a ruach shekar, a lying spirit. So you have imperfect plus vekatal, perfect. So you get flipped now. Now it's, instead of being a past, it's now I will go forth, just the good old imperfect, followed by vekatal form, ve plus the perfect, means also future. I will go forth and I will be a lying spirit. So there the perfect actually ends up being a future tense. Okay. He gives some examples of how that works. Letter B, under number 3 on page 227, a vekatal form, ve plus the perfect, following a participle may even refer to something that is not yet complete. Hineni omed lefanecha sham al hatsur bechorav vehikitha betzur veyatzu mimenu mayim. Behold, hineni, I am standing. I will stand before you there on the rock, the Tzur Bechoreb at Horeb, and you shall strike, you will strike. Vehikitha, that's that verb naka, strike, and you will strike the rock, and vayatzeu, perfect, and mayim will come out mimenu, from it. So do you see how the katal, or perfect, is being used in future tense? Okay. Now, as he explains on page 227 and 228, these vav consecutive or vayiktol forms, which are our main topic here, they're not that hard to recognize because they have that va plus doubling right on the front. So page 228, he gives us some examples. Yimsa, he will find. Vayimsa, and he found. Yipol, from the verb nafal, he will fall. Vayapol, and he fell. Okay. There are some peculiarities there, okay, but I don't want you to get too freaked out by these. Most of them have to do with gutturals and olives and things that you already expect to be problems, right? You know, when a problem child is a problem child, you expect it. It's not any less painful, but you're like, yeah, I know that's the way you act, okay? So too with our problem child verbs. Page 228b, if the verb has a first vav already, you get a little retraction of accent. So yeshav, he dwelled. Yeshev, he will dwell. Vayeshev, and he dwelled. Notice where the accent is there. Don't say vayeshev, okay, it's vayeshev. Teled, from Yalad, Hebor, not really Yalad, Hebor, it's always women doing the bearing, or at least usually. Teled, Shebor, Vateled. Notice where the accent is there. Same thing in the top, page 229. This is a common one. Kum, arise. Yakum, he will arise, but Vayakum, and he arose. Okay. Notice also that that second comments is in a closed, unaccented syllable, making it O. So kum, or he arose. Yakum, really kam is he arose. Kum is to arise. Yakum, he will arise, and then Vayakum, and he arose. Yasim, he will place. Vayasim, and he placed. Okay, do you see how that works? Gonna have to get used to this. Okay. By the way, third hay forms on page 229. If you have a hay at the end, the hay sometimes just gets cut off. So take like gala uncovered there, page 229 D3. Gala uncovered, he uncovered. Yigle, he will uncover. Vayigel, and he uncovered. So that's a little odd, right? You get the accent on the y, and then you lose the hey too. Bana is another example of this. So bana, he built. Yivne, he will build. Vayivin, and he built. Okay. You can look at these other examples. He gives some other ways, some gutturals on page 230. You might want to pause and look those over. I want you to read all the lessons, no matter what. So you should be covering this. Okay. Then he gives you some examples on pages 231 and 232 of how this works in a narrative context, okay? Take page 231a, 5a, Genesis 29:23. This is a very common construction. Vayhi ba'erev, vaychach el le'ah beto. Vayhi, right? This is like in Genesis 1. Vayhi erev, vayhi vocher, yom echad. And it was morning, and it was. Vayhi often is translated "and it was." It's from the root haya, to be. And this is haya in the imperfect, which would be yehyeh, but in the vav consecutive, the vayiktol, it's vayhi. Okay. And it happened. And sometimes you don't even have to translate this. If you have a phrase like vayhi ba'erev, you could just translate that as "and in the evening." Okay. Setting up the time. Vayichak, notice the vav consecutive. Vay, and then yachak. And in the evening, he took whom? Et Leah, Leah, his daughter. Do you see how the vav consecutive works as a past tense there? How about Genesis 26:32 right below? Vayhi bayom hahu, on that day. Again, you don't have to say "and it was on that day," even though you could sort of woodenly translate it like that. When you get a temporal indication, Vayhi ba'erev, in the evening. Vayhi bayom hahu, on that day. Vayavo'u avdei Yitzchak. And on that day, the servants of Isaac, Vayavo'u, they came, past tense, vayiktol, or vav consecutive, okay? And you get some other examples of how that works, okay? So haya works like this, kind of awkwardly, and it was, and it happened. You can also get future events, page 232b. The haya, notice the sequence there, the plus katal, or perfect. The haya bayom hahu, on that day, in the future. The karathi la'avdi, and on that day, now you have the karati, right? The plus katal, I will. So now the perfect is flipped into future, whereas the vayiktol seems to flip the imperfect or future into the past. The katal seems to flip the past into the future. And on that day, I will call the kalathi, my servant. I'll summon my servant. Okay. You get some other things down here. Number 6, I want you to review those examples, read them, okay, in Hebrew. That will help. So you get some clauses here where you might have to use words like while or when or as. So don't get too woodenly tied up or attached to the idea of translating the as and every time, or you'll just be reading Hebrew and it'll be like and. But really the has a greater semantic range than just and. It can also mean when or as or while or but or something like that, okay? He dumped some more vocab on you, but not too many. Not too many new verbs at least, okay? And then you've got some exercises there. This is a hard one. You may have to do this one a couple times to really get your mind around it, okay? So don't be worried if that's what you have to do.